Mark, how's it going?
Good. How you felt?
Living the dream, brother. You and I got hooked up via some Facebook thing, I think. And you have this music festival that you do. Is it yearly? And you do it yearly, correct?
Yeah, and it's a book and music festival. There's really nothing like this in the country. And
Hmm.
so, but yeah, we do it every year. It's in April in Tallahassee, Florida, and usually the last week in April. Although depending on when Easter falls, it moves around a little bit.
Now, why did you center it around Easter, or is that just the way it
And
fell?
that's just how it. I mean, we we have to fit it with the festival is held in Cascades Park in Tallahassee, which is sort of
Hmm.
the this new park downtown, and so we had to get a slot there because there's other stuff going on. There's something there every weekend, pretty much, and
Hmm.
so we have like for 10 years booked out. But Easter also falls during that period, and so it we move around because we don't want to be on Easter weekend.
Yeah, no, because that would be absolutely insanity, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what made you want to start the festival?
Well, I'm an author, so I've had several books published, and when my second one was published a while back, I got invited to speak at these literary festivals around the country, and I'd never been to one, and they were very cool. It was all mostly free. All these people that want to talk about books and are way into it, and so I was thinking, well, man, we should do something like that in Tallahassee. And I was on the city commission then. I was in a fit of insanity. I ran for public office and was elected. So I did that for 10 years. And so I kind of said, I need to get off the commission before we embark on this. And so I did. I didn't run again. And we started this and we said, well, rather than just being the Tallahassee version of the South Carolina Literary Festival, why don't we try and do something different? And
Hmm.
so we talked about we could do books in the environment or books in politics, but the sort of the easiest thing seemed to be, well, let's do books and music. And so we started the first year and we're still at it 12 years later. Really, I'm really proud of it. I thought I would be involved in this field for like 5 years and then I'm out of here. I'm doing something else, but
Right.
I'm still there. Part of it is I'd like to keep the vision because I think one of the dangers for us is to be all things to all people. And I think, books and music is what we do. And we do really interesting stuff with it.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? Too many sticks in the fire? You don't want to have too much going on, and because when you deviate from the core of something, it starts to fall apart, basically. And it doesn't stay true to itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I agree. And so, and we do some things that really nobody else does. So, for instance, if you're a
Hmm.
musician and you've written a memoir, and they all do eventually,
Yeah.
we want you to come to Word of South and talk about it. And they don't get asked to do that a lot. People want to hear them play. And so we've had Sheila E. and Ricky Lee Jones and Loudon Wainwright and just all these people that have written books. And hey, come talk about it and play a little bit too if you want to. And
Yeah.
so that's a pretty cool thing. We also pair authors and musicians. So we do these things, we call them wash ups, but they're basically, we throw these guys together and some of them have never met and said, hey, you guys want to appear together? And so like 99.9% of the time, it works out super. So
Yeah.
anyway, there's just a couple of the things that we try and do most that really nobody else does.
Yeah. What got you into being an author?
Well, I think it was probably an early midlife crisis. So I'm a lawyer, and
Hmm.
a lot of writers, knew like at age 12 they wanted to be a writer, and I didn't.
Hmm.
I wanted to be a lawyer, and I am one.
Hmm.
But I kind of about 10 years into that, I remember thinking, because my law practice, our clients are spread all around Florida, so you spend a lot of time in the car, getting one place or another. I remember thinking, by myself on I-10 again at night, going, got to be more than this. And
Hmm.
so I decided, well, I'll try and, I want to maybe try and do some other things. So I'd like to maybe teach and maybe run for public office and try and write a book. And so eventually I did all of those. And I taught for a couple of years at the community college here. And that was enough to cure me of wanting to do that. And then as I said, I ran for office. I was elected. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad it's over.
Hmm.
And then I had this naive assumption I could just sort of sit down and write a book and somebody would want it. And so I later saw somebody refer to that as the equivalent of waking up one morning and saying, hey, I think I'll go practice thoracic surgery today. And so I was very fortunate to get that book published. It was a regional press that's still around in some fashion called Pineapple Press in Sarasota published it. And the story, it was a novel. The story was, I still think the concept is great. It was about a black woman who claimed to be Christ returned, and this reporter that followed her around. And so, and so I just sort of fell into it, and I discovered I liked it. I liked, I felt like I had some level of talent. And so I just kept at it all these years. I've had three novels published now, and one of them got published in 10 languages, and I got invited to speak in Venice and all this stuff. So it was very cool.
Yeah, but Venice is a beautiful city. I've been there once, and then I'm going back if well, if that region is stable after what's going on in Iraq, but, or Iran, excuse me. We plan on going this year to Italy, so that'll be fun, but, anyways, do you play music yourself or you're just a fan of music?
Well, not since the high school band, and
Gotcha.
I played trumpet, and I was so bad that I sold the trumpet immediately after graduation.
Hmm.
But I've always liked music, and one of the best things for me personally about being involved with the festival is it's exposed me to all these different types and musicians that I've never otherwise I'd never come in contact with.
Right.
So, and one of the things at the festival we try and do is really not just only target one genre of music. So we do, Americana, we do rock, pop, R&B, classical, jazz. I mean, you name it, we're trying to do it. And with, yeah, I think with the, fair amount of success.
I think music is a very important part of our soul. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, and there's a connection with writing too. I mean,
Mhm.
I can, when I write, I can hear, I mean, audibly, sort of the words, and it all flows together. So it's interesting to pair those, disciplines together. But yeah, I agree. I mean, music, there's really nothing, if you try and figure out, well, you can sort of tell evolution wise why certain things develop. Hey, people have got to survive. Music, it's a little harder to,
Music is something the human soul cannot live without.
Well, I'll give you some examples of some of the artists we've had, and just some of the things that have stood out to me, and some of the things I'm proudest of the festival. So, so as I mentioned, we've done some things that are really just they're one of a kind things. You know, if you don't come to this, you don't ever see it. So we had a tribute a couple of years ago to Nat and Cannonball Adderley, who are from Tallahassee, and big jazz pioneers. And we had members of their family there. We had saxophone players come from all over to play. I mean, that was super special, and just it was just really fun. And then we did a tribute to Muscle Shoals musicians, and had a bunch of session musicians come down from Muscle Shoals, and and that was awesome. And then a couple of years ago, we did the historian John Meacham. We asked him to participate in the festival. And I had this idea. I said, well, hey, would you consider appearing with a musician? He said, yeah, sure. And so we paired him up with this woman. Her name is Yasmin Williams, and she's just a guitar phenom. And we said, hey, we had one Zoom call for like 10 minutes. They got together 10 minutes again before the show, and then went and did it and just knocked it out. And so I went up to them afterwards. I remember saying, I thought this would work. And Yasmin said, can we do this again? So that sort of stuff is just, I think it's what makes the festival really special. And then the musicians, again, some of these people, like I'd never really heard of John Paul White. You may know him. He was part of the Civil Wars group called the Civil Wars, and just a phenomenal musician. And just tons of others in all different disciplines.
Yeah, it goes to show you that when people, not even people from the same backgrounds or whatever, but when you have something that can, like music or literature, can really bring people together, and I think it can actually, I think it can gap race, it can gap religion, it can bridge all that stuff, and it's an amazing thing. So I think when you have something like as eclectic as what you're doing, it just brings people together, and it's harmonious, and I think it's really a fun thing. I don't, and then I think the world could use a little bit more of that.
Well, that's really, sort of our driving focus is, so when we started this, I had envisioned the financial model being kind of like a regular music festival where, hey,
Hmm.
you pay $300 for the weekend, you get a wristband, you wander around. But sort of the way it worked out, and I liked it, and we've kept it, is so we have a ticketed show in the amphitheater Friday night. This year it'll be Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Wow.
We've had last year was Violent Femmes with the symphony.
That's cool.
Year before was Flaming Lips, so
Mhm,
we've had, it's fun stuff. And
mhm.
then the rest of the weekends, all day Saturday and Sunday, 50 different acts on 8 different stages is all free. So we
Wow.
really get a diverse crowd, people that, we have stuff for kids, people you kind of wander down, hey, it's a nice day. Let's go down to the park and check it out.
Mhm.
Every kid that comes gets a free book. So I just think the model that we've got, I really want to keep it if we can. I mean, it's a struggle because we have to get grants and sponsors and that sort of stuff to keep it free. And the whole state arts funding, if you're familiar at all with that situation, we have been without any state funding for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And I know the governor's budget did not recommend any arts funding this year. I don't know if the legislature is going to do it or not. So anyway, that's been a challenge because that was like a fifth of our budget. So
Mhm.
we've managed so far to rock on, but it's again, it's every year it's we have to dig harder.
We were talking about is the bridging of communities like that. If somebody wanted to get on in your festival, is it hard to apply or is it pretty straightforward?
Well, I mean, it's pretty straightforward to apply, but it's sort of like, I guess, a lot of things. We don't take many just off random people applying. Generally, we have agents we deal with a lot that sort of know what we're doing. We'll pay attention to them. More often, we seek out who we want, who would
Yeah.
be a good fit for us and what we're doing.
Mhm.
If you're a musician who's written a memoir, it would be interesting to have come and talk about it. Who could we pair together that would be kind of a
Mhm.
cool thing? Make some music what we'd like to see that we haven't had recently or before. And so that, it's something we listen to. If our sponsor, somebody really wants something, we'll pay attention. So
Right.
it's a great mix of how we do it, but certainly people can apply.
Okay. And then, yeah, because I mean, you definitely don't want some like Norwegian satanic death metal band. You know what I
Well,
mean?
we've done different stuff. I wouldn't rule out a Norwegian.
Actually in the OR, we listen to music occasionally, and the nurse will ask, like, "What do you guys want to hear?" I go, "Norwegian death metal," and the room goes silent because it's like they have no idea what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. What don't mind me asking? What office did you run for?
So I was a city commissioner in Tallahassee for 10
Mhm,
years, and I had my law practice. We represent cities and counties around the state. And so
mhm,
people would ask me after I was elected, was this what you thought it would be? And I said, well, yeah, it's pretty much exactly what I thought it would be. Is this what I do? I mean, and so it was, it was advantageous because I, experienced in that stuff. So it took me less time to get up to speed on issues than some of the other commissioners, just as this was my law practice too.
mhm.
So, but it after 10 years, it wears you down some and
Yeah,
just, I mean, you can't make everybody happy and I never didn't try. I mean,
of course not.
and so you just kind of get, it was less people stopping me, people like, did they stop you in the store and harangue you? Well, not really. The only time I really got a lot of phone calls and stuff was when the power went out. And,
Really?
in Tallahassee, the city it's a municipal power, but people would, and I remember I got a call one time, this guy, so, hey, my wife is dying, hospice is here, and the power's out. And I'm like, see what I can do, see what I can, whatever. So it's just, that was a hard part of it.
This is not the same thing by any stretch of the imagination. I thought about getting on the board of my old HOA, and then I was like, you know what? I don't like to be bothered that much. Like if I'm sitting in, I got my plate of food when I get home from work, and someone's boom, boom, boom because they're going to complain. No, no, thank you. I couldn't. It takes a selfless person to want to run for public office because it's like you give up so much of your life for the public. And I'm not saying I'm a fan of the guy, but or whatever. I'm kind of neutral. But Barack Obama, when you look at him on his inauguration day, young, vibrant. 8 years later, when he was in 2016,
Yeah.
he looked like he aged 20 years. And it's like it just drains your soul. And plus, I'm not a very political person, but I will say this: it's like once that veil has been, from that level up, you know what I mean? That veil has been, you know, pulled back. You never go back. You know most of the crappy secrets. So it's like that innocence is gone from it.
Yeah, and it's gotten worse. I've had just recently, I've gone to some of the commission meetings because we're representing the city, the law firm is on some stuff. And just the level of vitriol there is way more than it was when I was there. part of it is the whole, current state of the country, and I get it. People are angry. I'm angry.
Yeah,
But
me
I mean,
too.
just coming and screaming at the elected officials who really don't have that much to do with what you're angry about, is not a productive thing.
No, I don't think any type of debate has been settled by yelling. I
Right.
don't think it helps. I mean, it's one thing to be passionate about something, but it's also when you yell, I feel it, or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that if you can't be composed and state your grievances in an adult manner, then maybe don't do that. I don't know,
Yeah, my
but
my my thing on that is if the meetings were not televised, I think 90% of that would go away because it's performative. They want to get out and show themselves, and so anyway,
yeah.
is what it is.
Are you still trying to write books, or are you kind of putting that on the back burner, or are you
Oh,
doing
no.
work?
So that sort of the way I've done it since the very first book is when I first started writing, my kids were really small. I mean, the only time I could do it was early in the morning. And I'd get up early and write for a while, and then the rest of the day was chaos. And I'm so exhausted at night I couldn't do anything. And
Mhm.
so, but I sort of discovered that worked for me, and so I've kept it up all these years. And I wrote some this morning.
Nice.
And I had a book published last year called Boy with Wings, and it's a novel about this boy that has these strange things on his back, and he ends up in a freak show traveling the South in the 1930s. And
Wow.
I've done a lot of research about sideshows, freak shows,
Mhm.
about the Depression era. And I had, a lot of those shows and circuses in general wintered in Florida. And so
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
actually, there's museums. There's an American Sideshow Museum down here, Tampa.
Okay.
And so, but I was trying to find, sort of a current sideshow performer I could interview about the book, and I never could get somebody. And even to the point where I finished the book, it was being published. And I see, of all things, there's a sideshow coming to Tallahassee. I'm like, oh my God, look at this. And so I sign up for the VIP experience where I get to meet the performers and all this. And then it cancels. And so,
No.
oh my God. So then I see, a few months later, it's rescheduled at another venue. I'm like, great, sign up again. I go down there, walk in the door, and the guy goes, "Oh, you're not here for that sideshow, are you? They canceled." So it's like, yeah. But I managed through all of that to sort of get a name and some contact info for a certain performer who I eventually got in touch with. And his stage name is Short E Dangerously. And and if you Google him and go on his website, there's a picture of him breathing fire with a mask on. And he is a half man. His body stops at, sort of at the bottom of the rib cage.
Wow.
And he walks on his hands or gets around on a skateboard. And so, so I got in touch with him finally and said, "Well, hey, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to do these appearances at some bookstores about the book. So, would you consider joining me?" And I said, "I just want to interview you about your life. What is it like when you walk into a room and everybody turns to look because you look different than everybody else does?"
Yeah.
Because that sort of played into the book and this boy with with the wings. And so, so he agreed to do it, and we did two appearances, one in Miami and one in Savannah. And it was interesting. He was a very unique guy. I really like him a lot. And well, first he asked me, he said, "Well, do you want me to perform?" I'm like, what kind of performance?" And he
Yeah.
said, "Well, I can do a handstand, and he goes, and if that gets the crowd going, I can do a one-armed handstand." I'm like, "Oh my God." And then he said, "The game with the cups where you move them around, you have to guess which cup the
Mhm.
ball under." He goes, "Well, I do that, but I put a spike in one cup and then I slam my hand down on the ones that don't have the spike." And he said, "If you Google magic tricks gone wrong, this is the first thing that pops up." I'm like, "What? Okay." So
Yeah.
he did that in Miami. And when my daughter moved the cups around, but he escaped unscathed on that.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, he paid me a great compliment. So if you're a fiction writer and you write historical fiction at all, I'm always really focused on trying to make sure the history is right. And so he said, "Hey, he read the book and said, well, how did you do your research for the sideshow?" Because he said, "Man, you nailed it." And I
Yeah.
said, "Well, I watched these documentaries, I read these books, blah, blah, blah. There was this guy who was, I read his memoir, who was Ward Hall, king of the sideshow." And he says, I knew it. He goes, I was in Ward Hall's show for 2 years. And so it was interesting just the, what a hard life that is. I mean, it's just, I mean, picking up, moving, constantly, and even this guy putting the show together, I mean, just trying to make the money work and all this and keep the people on the show. And so anyway, it was just a fascinating, kind of, thing. And
Yeah.
so anyway, the book has done quite well. It's won a number of awards. And so I'm very, very pleased with it.
Yeah, and then we'll, so where can people buy it? Is it on Amazon or is it
Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can order it from the bookstore, your local bookstore. Uh, and I'm working on another one. It's another historical fiction. Also, I'm superstitious about talking about it though until it gets
absolutely.
published. Because people will ask. I don't want people to go, well, what happened to the Revolutionary War novel? So, well, I couldn't get it published.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I hope this will in a couple of years I'll have another one out.
Yeah, so when you go to write, I mean, like, especially because 'cause I'm not super familiar with historical fiction, right? I mean,
Right.
it's so explain that just a little bit, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, there's different ways that it's done. I mean, for instance, Boy with Wings was, set in the 1930s. So,
Mhm.
so there was most of the history, and it was, what were sideshows like then?
Right.
This was a traveling sideshow. And so try and capture that part of history as part of the story. The other way to do it, and the way I'm doing it with the next book is I took a real person and sort of am imagining her life and sort of fictionalizing, but the real stuff that happened to her. And so that's sort of historical fiction also. So there's several different, sort of, manners of it.
And how do you, like, you don't have to go into super great detail because I don't want you to tell your secrets, but what when you how do you start researching for a project when, like, do you see something and it sparks your interest and then you just kinda go with it, or how do you get the inspiration for it?
Well, I mean, at first, I mean, you got to be way into it because these projects take years. I mean, they're like your children. The second novel that I had published was a book called The Gendarme. It's about the Armenian genocide. It's a
Okay.
novel. And my heritage is, we were told it was Armenian way back, and I never knew much about it. Last name ends in IAN, which usually is a sign of an Armenian background because it's a patronym that means son of.
Okay.
So this guy, we had a party at the house one night. This guy came up to me and said, well, hey, are you Armenian? Because I've been asked that my whole life. And I said, well, yeah, I think so. I don't know much about it. He said, well, have you read this book, The Black Dog of Fate? So I picked it up and read it. It was all about this guy, Peter Balakian, his, sort of coming to grips with his heritage. And so I just decided, well, yeah, maybe I'll try and write something about this and I'll do some research and learn something, if nothing else. And so one thing led to another, and it was a lot of research, and I learned a lot. And then I was able to get the novel published, and that's the one that's been published in 10 languages, and it has done very, very well.
Yeah, I've often thought about trying to write a book, and I get in my own head, and it's like, oh, it's just like Tolkien, for example. When he did his first draft of The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, he called it the wave effect.
Right.
So every time he would write a draft and he didn't like it, would start over from scratch every time. So say he got 100 pages in, he would start from scratch, and I'm my own worst critic in my head, so I would be like, you suck, and so I just stop. But I think I'm meant to do this. I really enjoy doing this kind of stuff. This is my creative outlet. I used to be a chef before I became a surgical tech, and that was, that was fun. It's an artistic way of, it can be, but I never got into that, like, gastronomy stuff or whatever it's called. So
Did your stress level go down when you moved from chef to operating tech or
about the same.
really?
Really? I mean, well, for that, it's a different type of stress, I mean, because
Right.
people don't realize that when you're messing with somebody's food, you can make people sick
Yeah.
if you don't do it right, you know what I mean? And thank God that nothing like that ever happened to me. And but the OR, it depends on your environment and where you're working. Like, if you're working at a community hospital, it's a little less. I mean, obviously every surgery is there's potentials for disaster, right? Very rarely, but they do happen. But if you're working at, like, just a small community hospital versus a level one trauma center, which I've worked at both, I'll tell you, I'll take the community hospital any day of the week because, you don't, like, I remember you're in Florida, so, I don't know if I mentioned on the show or not, but I was at Orlando Regional for the Pulse shooting. when it happened in
Oh my
2016.
goodness.
It was
Wow.
not definitely not a fun time. You know, it's one of those things they say, get to OR5 now. So
Right.
you drop your gear, you go, you go grab your stuff to scrub in and you just start working. It's just a different type of stress, but it's still, you just have to be able to manage it. And actually, that's what led me to leave level one trauma was because I just couldn't handle it anymore. You see just the destruction that people do to themselves and each other and all, and it just kind of really gives you a bad taste in your mouth after 7 or 8 years of doing it.
No, I can imagine. My father was a hospital administrator, as was my brother, and
Hmm.
so I've been around hospitals my whole life, and just so it's just a whole, I think there's just a lot of stress comes with the territory there.
Yeah, and I mean, and one time a doctor was asking me something, and I go, Doc, I just hand you shit. That's all I do. You know what I mean? That's obviously boiling it down to its bare essence, but the people that have the most responsibility in the room is obviously anesthesia and the surgeon. And then so my job is to get I always tell them it's my job to keep you out of court
Right.
because it's like if something's wrong or whatever and make sure nothing gets left in a patient, which I don't know how that can happen. And knock on wood, it can happen. But like years ago, there was a guy, he was walking through a metal detector, and we have a retractor. It's called a malleable retractor. Malleable mean you can bend it. It's a thin piece of metal, and it's 14 inches long. It's not tiny. He's walking through a metal detector and it dings. And he went and got an X-ray, and it's right. You could see it in the X-ray. And I'm
Wow.
like, and it's because that's what we use when we do a open belly case. We use it to protect the bowel from the suture, so we don't puncture it because what's in the bowel, poop. So we use that, and somebody got distracted, turned their head. It went in. They thought they took it out, and the count was right, but it wasn't. So it's stressful if you make it stressful. So I just
Were you there during COVID then?
for the tail end of it, yeah, because I was working at a surgery center at the time, and they got everybody. They just shut those down completely.
Yeah.
So I was at a small surgery center in Claremont, and I got furloughed for the majority of COVID, and then I think like May or June of that year, I went to back to a community hospital, and it was rough. They could make us wear these giant respirators and all this other junk, and then they like, you need to get the jab, and I was like, no, we're going to fire you. I'm like, well, I have to eat. So I and actually I just recently found out that, excuse me, that it's not even so much the shot that causes all the vaccine injuries. It's the swab, the
Really?
PRC or whatever it's called. Yeah, apparently that's where all the junks. I don't know. I don't really dig on conspiracy theories too much, but it was a trying time, but I think it was 100% avoidable if we're being honest.
So my sister-in-law died of COVID,
I am
and
sorry to hear that.
she was, I mean, she was a smoker, a sort of a lifelong smoker, and never got the vaccine, not for political reasons, just because it was just her. She never got around to it. But, once it hit your lungs, I mean, you were sort of, it was, downhill from there.
Yeah, I just, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't have taken the jab, but I did. And it is what it is. I was in the medical field. They threatened my job.
Right.
Second, I have an aging mother who's at the time, she was in her late 70s, and I'm not about to expose her to something and make her sick. So, I mean,
Right.
listen, I mean, if I had a time machine, Mark, I would go back and say, don't do it,
Yeah.
but, I mean, I know plenty of people that have taken it and they're fine. All these people that are talking about 5G and all this other crap, it's like, I
Right.
don't, I think that if you were a relatively healthy person to begin with, and I mean, I wasn't the healthiest. I was overweight back then because of being furloughed, not being able to work out and
Right.
eat appropriately. But I think that it really, I have so many different opinions on it. I really think that it was a test for compliance, is what I think. If we're going to get shadow government type shit, I think it was a little teaser of that. But what kind of law do you practice?
I do public finance law. So we represent, and the law firm itself does mostly represents local governments and different types of stuff. We do
Mhm.
litigation for them and that sort of stuff. But what I do is public borrowing. So if you're city of Claremont, you need a new police station, you go out and borrow money, usually through the bond market, and that's what we do.
Okay.
And that's what I've done my whole career. So it's been a good run. I'm about ready to wrap it up, but
Yeah.
but it's been, it's nice sort of feeling like you're doing something to help people, I mean, rather than to just make rich people richer.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of lawyers do.
Hmm.
we help. We do a lot of affordable housing work also that the firm does. I do that's about 50% of what I do. So yeah, that's been pretty rewarding as well.
Yeah, it's it's always good. I've learned in my life that helping people, there's no better reward than that feeling you get, that you've actually helped somebody accomplish something or feel better about themselves or whatever. You know what I mean? I think that's why I've been in the surgical field for so long. I've done it for 25 years, and you have somebody that comes in and they have a colon cancer that you're able to remove or help the surgeon remove it, and they're going to be fine.
Right.
Or they just no chemo, no radiation. It's just this little section of whatever that needs to come out, and we put it back in, and 6 weeks later they're good to go. It's very rewarding. Or you see a child come in and they got a deformed femur, and we fix it. And they're
Right.
going to be able to walk somewhat normally. So I mean, we're really put on this earth to help one another and not hurt anybody. I don't think. you know.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So speaking of philosophical stuff, I have two questions I ask people that come on the show, no matter who they are. The first one is, what are two core beliefs that make you Mark?
Oh, let's see. Well, I was a Boy Scout, well, way back in the day, and so some of that stuff is stayed with me, including trying to make it better than you left it. And so I've tried to do that, in most aspects of my life. With the law firm, with the festival. Festival is a lot of work. It's like a whole
Yeah.
other job. And so it's sort of my gift to Tallahassee, and the state. I don't get paid for it, but I'm proud of it. So, I guess that's probably one there, in terms of core. And then I guess the other is I've learned, after all this period of time, not to take myself too seriously. You got to be able to laugh at yourself and laugh at other people, and humor sort of drives so much stuff. So hopefully I have a good sense of humor. I think I do.
Yeah. And then the other one is, you're about to shove off the mortal coil
Hmm.
and go to whatever's next. What do you want to be remembered for?
Well, certainly for my children and my family, and then I think just from being willing to listen and try and help other people. I think that's, I mean, again, I've been fortunate, super fortunate in my life. And so I've tried to think, in the last stage of it, what do I want to do?
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think I just want to be, hitting a ball around the golf course. So I'd like to keep going with the festival. I'd like to, serve in some other ways. And because the state, the country, the city have all been really good to me. And so I'd like to give back and even more in the last part here.
Yeah, that's absolutely lofty goals, man. I think, I wanted to do Boy Scouts, but I grew up poor, and not to say you have to be rich to be in Boy Scouts or anything like that. But what I'm saying is we just didn't have the funds for me to do it, right?
Right.
When I was a kid. So I think when you have some sort of regimented discipline like that, I think it really, especially that young, it's a building block to become a good adult. It's like going into the military, kind of, it can be. We have that discipline and structure. It really helps people. Puts things in perspective at a young age. You know what I mean?
Now, the other good thing about scouts was it instilled in you as a youth the love of being outside and just, and so natural beauty and natural things. And so it's really, it's somewhat lost in the modern world of people. They're used to air conditioning and watching TV. And so sleeping out on the ground under the stars, well, that's, not really something they're familiar with.
No, it's not. And then yet most people can't even start a fire.
I know.
You know what I mean? So if people want to get at you, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me. I have a website, so you can find me that way. It's markmustian.com. It's just my name.com. And then if you'd like to read the book, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at a bookstore. And there's a way to contact me on the website too. If you have questions, you want to talk, you want me to come speak at your book club or your event, happy to do it. So I enjoy visiting with people. So everyone's free to contact.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to take this opportunity to say thanks for coming on. And you can find my show on Spotify, YouTube. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. And we'll catch y'all later.